por asistir a esta.
El introductor de la oceanografía en España decía que había que enseñar a los pescadores.
We were told that we had to teach fishermen to actually fish better. We're going to be talking about oceans. And we'll be hearing from experts on oceans. We'll be hearing about Red Eléctrica's experience as well. We have the expertise, and we'll be hearing about the protection of oceans, which is a basic part of our biosphere, in particular, the fight against climate change. So that will be the first session. Then we'll be holding a panel session on biodiversity. This is another key aspect. We here in Red Eléctrica have the commitment, moving towards 2030, to have a positive impact on the natural capital we have, and I'm sure you'll hear a lot about that as we hear from the panelists. Then we're going to be talking about climate change. This is the key challenge facing all of us in our time. So what we will be leaving for future generations. And what did we do when we had the data, when we knew about the consequences of what we were doing? And if we didn't stop doing it, I'm sure we'll be talking about that during that panel session. And then we will also be having a dialogue in the panel session between Hugo Morin, who's the Secretary of State for Environment here, and Ségolène Royal. An exciting day ahead of us, and we're sure that those of us here in the room and those of you following us online will be able to enjoy this conference. And we're very fortunate, as I said, to have Maria García de la Fuente joining us and moderating. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tony. Yes, you're absolutely right. We will be able to enjoy some excellent presentations this morning. We're going to be talking about oceans, first of all. On our blue planet, oceans play a key role. They host between 50 and 80% of all life on Earth. Oceans also play a key role in the water cycle, in the chemical composition of the atmosphere, and in moderating climate. The ocean regulates our climate, and we'll be talking about that this morning. It's the source of proteins for more than 1 billion people who actually depend on oceans for their livelihood. More than 3 billion people depend on the marine and coastal biodiversity that exists here for their daily livelihood. And there is an estimate that there are more than 300,000 different species under the water. A lot of those we're not familiar with. There's a lot still to be discovered on our planet. It provides employment and wealth. Oceans represent more than 90% of world trade. That's done on the seas. And the marine world and its resources are number 14 on the list of the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN 2030 Agenda. The 2020-2030 decade has been declared as the decade of science of the ocean for sustainable development. We have a video here that's been sent by Alexandra Gustod. It's her personal view on the importance of oceans, and we'll be able to understand a little more about the role of oceans in the fight against climate change. Let's enjoy this video. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria, for having me here today to speak about the oceans. And I'm sorry that I can't be there in person. I would have loved to come to Madrid and join you today. But the oceans are an incredibly important topic now. And I think that we are starting to understand that the crisis in the oceans is no longer something that we can just look away from. And this is increasingly impacting our health and our societies and our future. Obviously, the situation with climate change and ocean health is getting dire and is only going to get worse if we stay on the path that we're on. But it's an exciting time for me to be able to speak with you about the oceans, because I think that we're on the cusp of really being able to rebuild the ocean abundance that my grandfather knew in a way that we never were before. Now, oceans have always been an incredibly important part of my life. I could swim before I could walk, and I joined my grandparents and my parents on expedition from the time I was just 4 months old. When my grandfather taught me to dive when I was 7, it was a moment that transformed me, and it transformed my life. He opened my eyes to something that I had heard about, but never experienced. He took me out one day on a small boat from the port of Nice in the south of France, where we used to spend our summers. And we motored out into the ocean. And he had designed this small scuba outfit for me with, a mask and a regulator that was too big for my mouth, and a small tank on little rubber suspenders, and a weight belt that was too heavy, and little fins that he'd fashioned for me. And I was a skinny girl, so everything felt kind of uncomfortable. And when I went up to the side and looked down into this deep, dark water, I got really scared. I didn't know if this regulator that was in my mouth was going to be able to give me oxygen to breathe under the surface. And I was really nervous, even though I had spent my life in the water and loved being underwater swimming. I was a little bit nervous about scuba diving. And I seriously considered asking him if we could just skip the whole thing and just go back to port, when he came up next to me and kind of gave me a wink and said, "Are you ready?" and pushed me in. And so when I got in the water, I took a tentative breath, right, with my nose under the water. I took a tentative breath with the regulator, and it worked. And so I took another tentative breath, and it worked again. And I was off. I started diving down, and at about 3 or 4 meters, I looked up, and I saw this small school of silver fish that were swimming right towards me. And the sun was shining off of their little bodies, and they looked like fireworks underwater. It was absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. And as they came closer, they started to swim around me, and I could reach my hand out, and they would swim away, and I'd pull my hand back in, and they'd come closer, and they were swirling around me for just a moment before they went on. But in that moment, I knew that I would love and protect the oceans for the rest of my life. And over the years, the conservation message that my father and my grandfather had articulated for the oceans really resonated with me and became a foundational part of who I am. And when I was about 8 or 9, my grandfather was in the midst of his campaign to protect Antarctica. And, Antarctica up until that time, had basically been uninhabited. And this was the debate about what the future of Antarctica would be. And a lot of companies wanted the rights to go and mine in Antarctica, which would have destroyed it. So my grandfather was really one of the leading figures in trying to establish multinational protections for the continent of Antarctica so that it would remain a monument of nature for future generations and be reserved exclusively for scientists and filmmakers. And I wanted to help him in his campaign. And so I got his petitions and I started handing them out to people and asking for signatures. And that was my first real act of activism. But something happened when I was asking for signatures on the petition, which has stayed with me forever, which is that a woman that I had approached refused to sign the petition. Now, coming from my family, I couldn't understand why she would possibly have any reason not to sign my petition. But she explained to me that she relies on her car to get to work and take her children to school. And if we have to go and dig for oil in Antarctica, that's just what would have to happen so that she could continue to drive her car. And I was stunned because I couldn't understand the mentality of being okay with destroying our planet, our natural world at any cost to maintain an unsustainable way of life. But it was a wonderful lesson because she opened my eyes to the fact that there are different perspectives around these issues. And that if we're going to be successful in moving forward with a consensus for what the right thing to do is and being able to move forward and take action, like real action for our oceans, then we had to find a way to talk about the issues so that it brought us together. Now, ultimately, as you all know, Antarctica was protected by a multinational treaty and remains this pristine continent that we all know, reserved for scientists and filmmakers. And that was an extraordinary accomplishment that belonged to many, many people, not just my grandfather. There were many people and ministers and environmental advocates that worked on getting that done. And it inspired me because it showed me what is possible when we all work together and we establish a common vision of what we can do and what we should do for the future. But since then, I have watched the oceans diminish every year. We've had net losses for our oceans, for the life that lives in the oceans, every single year of my life. And today we've lost 50% of our oceans. So half of the fish and whales that swam in the ocean when my grandfather invented scuba 70 years ago are gone. And that trajectory can continue if we don't create real change in how we do things. Scientists estimate that we have about 10 years before we reach some tipping points at about 60% of our oceans lost, from which it will be difficult to come back. So the time is now, and it is urgent that we take action. And I realized this a number of years ago after my children were born. And I started to question this ethic of conservation and sustainability that I had been living with my whole life, that I have spent my life advocating for, because it felt like conservation, once we've lost half of our ocean, is insufficient to the task of leaving our children a viable planet to live on. I looked at my kids and I realized that I I couldn't continue to tell them that protecting what we have left was good enough. So I called a friend of mine, Professor Carlos Duarte, and he's widely regarded as one of the greatest ocean scientists and climate scientists in the world. And I wanted his opinion about what we could realistically expect in the future. You know, are oceans going to continue to degrade, and will my children be the generation of my family that writes the obituary for the world's oceans? Or is there a chance that we could turn it around and actually bring that life back? And he said, no, actually, we can bring it back. It is scientifically possible to rebuild marine biodiversity, to rebuild ocean abundance so that they are as abundant as when your grandfather first explored them. And that for me was a revelation. I had never imagined that that would be possible. But once I knew it and I had reviewed the science, which was subsequently published in Nature under the title of Rebuilding Marine Biodiversity, I decided that I was going to pivot to a new direction, which would be the translation of his science into action to rebuild our world's oceans. And that was when we created Oceans 2050, with the goal of enabling everyone, companies, governments, individuals, nonprofits, anyone, to participate and contribute to rebuilding a common vision of an abundant ocean. Because I think that all of us, every one of us, has a meaningful role to play in this very critical task ahead of us, which is rebuilding our world. One of the first projects that we undertook in Oceans 2050 was to study how seaweed farms sequester carbon in the sediments under the farm. And you might be wondering why that felt so important that it would be our first project. But when we look at our oceans that are rapidly losing oxygen, gaining temperature, gaining acidification, and losing biodiversity, we realize that ocean forests, which just like forests on land have existed in the oceans forever and are varied and beautiful, but also play this critical role in the health of the oceans, whether it's salt marshes or mangroves or seagrass, or perhaps most importantly, seaweed. These ocean forests provide habitat for fish and other species. They oxygenate the water, they sequester carbon, they deacidify the water, they protect coastal communities. And almost like magic, they can be turned into all sorts of different industrial feedstocks, from biofuel to plastic alternatives to cosmetics and nutraceuticals and food and other things. And so we decided that one of the ways that we could help to scale seaweed farming around the world was to create a voluntary carbon protocol for seaweed farmers so that we could drive investment into seaweed farming from this increasing interest in blue carbon. And so we gathered together the first global cohort of seaweed farms from all over the world, from indigenous led seaweed farms in Alaska to Chile to Maine to France and Norway and Madagascar and Indonesia, China, Korea. And we even have a 300-year-old seaweed farm in Japan that's part of our study. And we've been collecting core samples from the sediment under the farms, bringing it together to Monaco, where I am now for the results of those analyses. And we will be announcing those results and bringing them to market in a few months. And as we were putting together this project, we realized that there is global interest in seaweed farming. you know, we couldn't have imagined that there would be this much interest in seaweed farming, and that were this interest to move to action, and were we able to really scale this regenerative form of ocean agriculture, it could have a meaningful impact on climate change. So one of the ways that we hope government and businesses can help us to scale seaweed farming is to streamline the process for innovations. Now, that's true for any innovation related to the environment or climate change or anything. Governments can be way more reactive than they are in making sure that new innovations can reach the market and scale quickly. But with seaweed, it's especially important. You know, the current area of seaweed farming globally is just 2,000 square kilometers. And 95% of that, of course, is in Asia, with a lot of the remaining seaweed farms in Africa, where the industry is relatively new. In the Western world, I think we have a combined area of seaweed farming that's not even 1% of the total area, so it's completely anecdotal. But seaweed farming can easily be scaled up to an area 1,000 times greater than it is without having any negative or unintended consequences for the environment. That is a huge opportunity. And realizing that potential for regenerative seaweed aquaculture is going to require major policy changes in the Western world, because in Europe and North America, seaweed farming has traditionally been considered technology of the poor or of Asia, and hasn't been promoted or really considered to be an area worth developing by government. And I think that needs to change, because the contribution of seaweed farming as a regenerative force for oceans is becoming more clear and more recognized. And to give you a specific example, in the US, when potential seaweed farmers go to request a permit to start a seaweed farm offshore, they find the process to be as restrictive and painstaking and long-lasting as if they were trying to get a permit for oil and gas exploration. And one is regenerative to the oceans, and the other one is destructive for the oceans. And so this is really an area that government policy can create change by streamlining and fast-tracking seaweed farming applications. We realized that as we were finding all of this interest in seaweed and in this idea that we can rebuild our oceans to abundance, we needed to, so we realized that we can't react our way into an abundant future. We can't reach an abundant ocean by cataloging and monitoring our losses. If we're going to reach abundance, we need to switch to a system where we catalog and monitor our gains. And to get to a better place, we need to establish a vision of where to go. And so we are launching next month the Institute for Abundant Oceans, which will basically be an institute led by Professor Carlos Duarte, and bringing together his global network of scientists to start creating a roadmap into the future that can help us understand how we reach abundant oceans by 2050, where the gaps are in our collective action, and where we need to solve problems, where we need to move faster, and where we're reaching our goals. And our goal is to work with companies, with governments, with investors, to help plot that strategy and to plot that roadmap into the future, so that we can all start working together on this common vision. And that's really exciting to me, because we are at a moment in time where people are in agreement that things have to change. Business as usual isn't possible anymore. And it's becoming an emotional issue. I read a really disturbing study the other day that shows that 1 in 4 young people around the world are concerned or extremely concerned about climate and don't want to have children. You know, they're living in a time of extraordinary uncertainty that makes them feel like the future isn't a safe place for them to have kids. And that's really sad. And when a few years ago, I was in Vermont and I was making a film about the blue-green algae blooms in Lake Champlain, and visiting a dairy farmer one day who had taken action to reduce the contribution of nitrogen and phosphorus from his farm through the streams and rivers into Lake Champlain, because most of that algae bloom was a result of pollution and runoff from dairy farms. And so the whole day was spent, you know, touring around his dairy farm and understanding the changes that he'd made, and it was tremendously exciting. And at the end of the day, I asked him, you know, with all of these changes that you've made, how do you feel now about your work and the outcome that you've gotten? And he said, you know, I feel amazing, because for the first time in my life, I feel like my choices and my values are aligned, and I'm leaving a better future for my children. And I thought that was really profound, because certainly those are sentiments that I share. But I was actually 8 months pregnant at the time, and I went home to Berlin and I had my baby. And it wasn't until a few months later, when I was hosting a National Geographic documentary on sustainable cotton, that I found myself in India, in Madhya Pradesh. It's a very rural and traditional part of India. And I was interviewing an organic cotton farmer who was showing me around his relatively small plot of cotton, and all of the changes that he'd made. And we made organic pesticide together, where we were grinding hot pepper and onion and ginger that he'd grown on his farm and that he used as an organic pesticide. And he showed me many other things changes that he'd made on his farm. And at the end of the day, I asked him, I said, so how do all of these changes make you feel? And he said, you know, I see life coming back to my land. I have a better harvest. I'm making more money. But most importantly, I realized that I am living in alignment between my choices and my beliefs, and I'm leaving a better future for my children. And that's when I realized that it is an unrecognized human need, I think, that we all have, to live in a way where our values are not in conflict with our actions. And it's something that the young generation feels, because they are demanding change. We are seeing a momentum for change from young people that I don't think we've ever seen before, because they want to live in alignment with their values, and they want change so that they have a livable future. And that makes complete sense to me. But I think that this is a moment that reminds me of something that my grandfather once said to me, which was that when asked how he was able to do everything that he did, he said that it was really because he was living in his lucky moment in time, where everything that he wanted to do was finally possible. The right technologies had been developed, the right problems existed, and it all came together with this extraordinarily successful global movement for change. And I think that that's what we're living through now, where we have the environmental movement, which has been described as the largest movement in human history, that doesn't have a leader that everybody follows, but where everybody involved in improving our environment is driven by that same sense of grief over what we're losing and hope that we can turn it around. So we have this huge movement of people wanting change. And with that, we have the ability to organize ourselves with digital tools in a way that we never were before. And we have technology that allows us to do things that we could never do before. So we are working on a number of projects that will allow us to fully embrace this lucky moment in time with advanced technology for coral reef restoration that allows us soon to 3D print live corals underwater and make it possible for companies or municipalities or groups of people to come together and participate in building a reef together. We're launching a search engine for rebuilding our oceans. We are launching a new seaweed initiative to expand the seagrass cultivation for marine rice in partnership with a Michelin star chef from Spain, hoping that that kind of a business model will allow us to scale seagrass restoration around the world. And as we do with our seaweed farming project, advance opportunities for coastal communities, for women, and contribute to a just transition. These are all opportunities that really we've never had before. And it is because we have this mass intent to create change, coupled with the digital revolution, coupled with technologies that we've never had before. And that is what I think makes me hopeful that we can actually start to turn this situation around from experiencing global loss every year to rebuilding our oceans over the course of the next 10 or 20 years so that our children in 2050 have abundant oceans again. And it is our intent and our mission to enable and amplify the efforts of everyone who wants to do that. So I'll leave you with that thought and wish you a wonderfully productive conference. I hope that you're all able to leave the conference with ideas and inspiration and a clear picture of how you can move forward in creating the kind of change that we need. Because I think that it will take all of us. But I think that this is our lucky moment in time to do it together. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, what I wanted to do was to share a few thoughts with you following on what we've heard from Alexandra Cousteau in that video. I think all of us surely feel that fascination when we do some scuba diving, we go into the sea and the ocean, and we see that how marvelous it is to discover those species that are underwater that we don't usually see. It's fascinating, isn't it, to discover what's there, and that should also push us to conserve what's there. And that's the first thought. And then another thought for you is that challenge that we have ahead of us, that we need to understand how important oceans are for our daily lives. We need to see that linkage and how important it is to conserve marine life. We need to do that when we do whatever we have to do in our daily life, even when we're just traveling or going to the supermarket to our shopping. These are all challenges that face us all. Oceans are important to us all, and there's a lot at stake for us with conservation what's under then. We're going to hear about a surprising project now that Red Eléctrica is implementing. It's a wonderful project, and that is the marine forest. It's a pioneering project in the whole world. It's for biological diversity conservation. It's all about conserving the meadows of Posidonia oceanica, Mediterranean seagrass. Red Eléctrica has been able to use an innovative technique to be able to try and conserve this plant in this area. We hope you like the project. You can see we've got a video for you with heart and science behind it. Red Eléctrica's marine forest, Posidonia oceanica, Mediterranean seagrass. Posidonia oceanica's meadows are highly important formations for biodiversity because of their flora and fauna wealth and because they are so influential in the conservation of marine ecosystems. In addition, they are highly relevant as organic carbon stores because every single year they can accumulate up to 10% of the carbon footprint that is produced by oceans. These characteristics turn Mediterranean seagrass, Posidonia oceanica, into a key actor in the fight against climate change, and that's why they're included in Appendix 1 of the Berne Convention as a strictly protected flora species, and it's also included a number of EU directives for protection. Red Eléctrica's marine forest is, of course, a biodiversity project. That's quite clear, but it's also regenerating the space. There's another pillar, though, and that is the pillar of the fight against climate change. Why? Because this is a degraded meadow area underwater, and we're trying to avoid all of the CO2 emissions in the meadows. And it's biodiversity because we're regenerating this degraded area. And once again, we hope it will grow and all the ecosystem around it. The commitment that we have in Red Eléctrica with biological diversity and the fight against climate change, together with our responsibility that we feel that we have to avoid or minimize any interactions of our underwater electricity cables with the Mediterranean seagrass meadows, led us in 2012 to embark on an innovation project, which is R&D too, to be able to study the seeds and fragments of the plant and try to restore the meadows. It's a project developed in collaboration with the Mediterranean Advanced Studies Institute. It's two areas for investigation and research and planting, one in Ibiza and the other in Mallorca. In both locations, with excellent results, we have been harvesting, cultivating, and planting both seeds and fragments of Mediterranean seagrass. With the conclusions from that project, we have set up our Red Eléctrica marine forest. This is a pioneering project in Europe. The purpose is to restore 2 hectares of Posidonia oceanica in Poyensa Bay, Mallorca. This project has been developed with the help of the Regional Department for Environment, Agriculture and Fishing and the Higher Council for Scientific Research. And it's also working for environmental education and scientific dissemination. The key purpose of the project is to restore the degraded meadows, and we're using the military aerodrome. With that collaboration, we're being able to install in the Poyensa Bay more than 12,800 seeds and fragments of Mediterranean seagrass, which in the first stage are giving us some hopeful results. It's a unique experience. In addition, it is a commitment to the future, because what we're trying to do with this plantation is to have an experimental area of Mediterranean seagrass meadows that we are trying to restore and recover. It's going to give us the opportunity to study the recovery of the structure of the meadow and its functioning, all of its ecological functions and the services that the meadow gives us. To assess the success of the planting and the ecosystem, the project will be monitored in different ways. Firstly, we'll be assessing the method for planting the fragments 1 month later, and then annually we'll be evaluating the survival and development of the pieces of the plant that have been transplanted. The monitoring of the Mediterranean seagrass clones will also be done at a pace of the recovery of the functionality of the ecosystem in the restored area. Finally, there is an evaluation made of the organic carbon that's built up, both the original from the plantation itself and also captured from other engines and calculated by transforming it into CO2 tons. Another one of the purposes of the project, this marine forest, is environmental education and scientific dissemination. One, through school visits, field visits to the special centre that's been set up to explain the project, and also through the publication of a practical guide for planting of Posidonia oceanica that will allow the whole model to be replicated all through the Mediterranean. Red Eléctrica's marine forest project It forms part of our sustainability policy and the sustainability model we have in the company, through which what we want to do is contribute value, generate shared value with society, the society in which the company is operating. So the goal is for the marine forest to be open to the whole educational scientific community, and it becomes a trigger, a catalyst for environmental education and a living laboratory that guarantees the existence of other research on the marine ecosystem in the long term. And these are the awards and accolades. Well, what a wonderful project. I think all of us are dying to put on our goggles and get underwater and see it a little closer. Let me invite the panelists for the next panel session to come and join me. Gretel, if you could, José Luis, and Jaime. So we have a panel session now on biodiversity and business. The challenge of environmental sustainability, I think, is becoming more and more important in the global agenda, because it is now urgent for us to have a framework for action to be able to revert the loss of biodiversity. And this now needs to engage all stakeholders to be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in the 2030 agenda. We have to change our whole relationship with the environment. We have to accept that we form part and parcel of the environment and transform our society. There are a number of different challenges that we're facing. One is biodiversity loss, another one is climate change or environmental degradation. And I think increasingly we have a challenge to protect our own activity and the health of the planet, to be able to talk about these challenges. For biodiversity and the role of business here, we have four high-quality, very high-caliber speakers here. Leire Pagina sent us a video message. Unfortunately, she sent her apologies that she can't be with us this morning. So let's get started with the video. First of all, Leire is the President and CEO of Reds.
Muy buenos días.
Very good morning, everyone. Well, first of all, I'd like to apologize because, due to last-minute changes and agenda issues, prevented me from accompanying you today. But I didn't want to miss out on this conference on biodiversity and enterprise, which is absolutely essential in current times, and I didn't want to miss this opportunity to be with you, even if only for a minute. So I'd like to take this opportunity to send a very warm greeting to my dear friend Beatriz, chair of Red Eléctrica, and my good friend Tony Cabo, with whom we work very closely. So I think we are at a time where we need to reflect on the lessons learned after the pandemic. It has changed our lives in many, many different respects. It changed and altered our concept of safety, security, or certainty, and our trust, most of all. And it showed us what was important about having a holistic view, and all-encompassing view, and very cross-cutting vision of the challenges ahead of us. We've lived in a very harsh and unusual way that the connections in the world today are global. Health, economy, environment, they are not in closed compartments. They cannot be dealt with individually. They are absolutely interconnected, and we cannot ensure or guarantee one without guaranteeing and ensuring that the other ones are doing all right. So we have also learned in a very clear way that the goals and targets of the 2030 agenda, this universal agenda from the UN, are absolutely interlinked. We need to preserve the collective commons. That's so important, as we saw, universal access to healthcare, as we saw during the pandemic, to energy, to education to food even, and to create fair and sustainable societies, we need to do just that. And we currently have the technological knowledge that allows us to do that. We need to be to promote economic growth, but always respecting in full respect of people and the planet, because our resources are limited. The Spanish Network on Sustainable Development publishes every year a report on the progress of SDGs across the world, and we saw that the pandemic had suffered very direly the effects of the pandemic, the progress. And there has been many steps backward in many cases, in many countries across the world, on the road to achieving SDGs. In Spain, for several years, there have been good progress that showed us that many of the policies that had been adopted and implemented for climate change and the environment were going in the right direction. But that also shows us that in the case of SDG number 15, for terrestrial ecosystems, we are lagging behind and not protecting, sufficiently protecting biodiversity. And it means it leads us to see that the indicators are not changing in the right direction, that they are not making as much progress as we would like forest wildfires, forest fires, and desertification in our country, and CO2 emissions, and the importance of implementing the energy transition and the green transition need to be further promoted. So the effects of climate change and the biodiversity loss, the effects are going to be much more devastating than the pandemic itself. We need to reach, to be able to cut in half the global level of emissions in the next few years. And we need COP26 to have a much more ambitious goals than we had ever before. We are living in critical times. Co-responsibility is essential. We need to ensure and offer greater guarantees for the regeneration of the social and environmental fabric, and that's how we can manage to reach the necessary outcome. So both the private and public sector need to align with the SDGs goals and objectives, mobilizing investment for the transformations we need by means of not only the recovery and resilience plans of the EU, but also through public policies to mitigate social inequalities. That there's increasing social inequality that we are witnessing right now. So this perspective will allow us to promote economic growth by having as a catalyst private companies to have a more sustainable views with a new social contract, with social commitment towards the country they live in. And we believe that the private sector's commitment is also key because they have the capacity for innovation, the ability to generate effective solutions that are scalable in time. They are because the social contribution that will also facilitate the implementation of these partnerships that governments are launching everywhere for an inclusive green growth. We need these partnerships, alliances that are multi-partner alliances with innovative projects, and that's the only way to go out of this crisis emboldened and better than we were before. Private companies can invest in sectors to promote sustainable development with sustainable mobility, green employment. If embracing a new industry, a new kind of industry that is much more sustainable, with a healthcare system that guarantees universal access for all, with sustainable tourism that is not only sustainable in time but also respectful and environmentally friendly, and that gives us the means to transform this crisis into an opportunity. and to be able to face further challenges that lie ahead. And so I hope that this conference will allow us not only to identify the challenges and opportunities, but to make us still work together to be able to make the most of this situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leira, for sending us that video message. And I have with me, thank you very much for joining us, Greta Aguilar, who is head of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, Deputy Director General. We also have Jaime Reis, who's from Red Electronics, and we also have with us Jose Luis. Thank you for joining us. Business and biodiversity, these are words that didn't used to come together in any panel session, and I think they have to go together, don't they? As we heard from Leira, we have to set up those important partnerships. Gretel, in September, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, UICN, organised a summit, didn't you, for business leaders as part of your World Conference. What did you hear then? What feeling did you come away with? What message was conveyed to you by them? And what role can be played by businesses in conserving nature? Well, thank you very much. Let me start off by thanking the Red Eléctrica Group for inviting me to join you today. Yes, you're right. We did hold our World Nature Conference back in September. 6,000 participants and thousands who joined us online. And we held that private sector event at the same time. And I wanted to start off by telling you that there is no chance that we will be able to protect our biodiversity or to work with climate change unless we bring them in. We will never achieve that expected change. We will never get a planet that will be able to be a habitat for all of us now and for future generations without business participation and engagement. That is the first conclusion I would draw. We all know, don't we, that without business we don't have a future. At the meeting that we held with businesses, there were businesses that represent $1.1 trillion in market cap. In other words, 600 billions represent 6,000 billions of dollars in products and services. We're talking about huge named companies there. That's the good news. Yes, that's the good news, because it means that business is opening up, that they are wishing to help, and they have a vision. But what we're talking about, we talk about sustainable agriculture, about the circular economy, the fact that we can't just continue with this linear economy where we just produce, we use, and we throw away. We have to change our whole consumption model, don't we? We've been talking about energy, clean energy that we should all be able to enjoy. It's not about really changing completely the way we live, our behavior and habits, and suffering living. No, we want to live well, but we need to have a quality of life, a standard of living where we're very much aware of our own footprint. And it's so important to be able to discuss concrete things that we can do with business. But I think perhaps the most interesting thing about that whole dialogue here, and you talked about this yesterday too, is that companies say that they're committed, they're engaged, they're ambitious, they were there at our worldwide conference, but it's the how do we do it that's important. And at our summit, we talked about specific goals, measurable goals to measure what we're doing. We talked about transparency too. We talked about the tools that we have. So if a company, for instance, commits to reducing its own emissions, how can there be acknowledgement of that for that business, or how can the rest of the world be made aware of that? Which businesses are committed, for instance? There was a lot of talk too about data. I know you talked about that. too. And the International Union for the Conservation of Nature that I'm representing here today, we are convinced that data is there. And it's not just an economic evaluation. This is an environmental assessment. We have to look at the risk for the environment, and at the same time we have to take preventive steps to make sure we don't cause any harm. That is the basic premise, that we shouldn't produce anything that can hurt us at all. And we shouldn't, of course, hurt ourselves in production. And there was a very open-minded position taken by the businesses there to work on these mechanisms. Let me finish, if I could, by repeating something that the Vice President said yesterday when she spoke. She said, we are all responsible and we are all leading players, we're all the protagonists. That's absolutely right. It's not just about communities, private sector or government, it's all of us. But the private sector, businesses, do play a key role if we are to be able to achieve those sustainability goals for all of us. Jaime, perhaps you could pick up where Gretel has left off. What is the role of business? Do businesses really believe in that role? Can they become agents for change? Well, I totally agree with what you've said already, and those conclusions that you reach. We also reached the same conclusions a few years back now, 2017. The problem that we have right now is time. We have very little time to be able to take some good decisions, but who's going to tie the bell on the cat? There's so many things that have to be done, and where do you start, and who starts? Who can help us to really make this an effective process as quickly as possible? Maybe the scientists, but scientists, well, have spent 40 years already telling us that what will happen is what's happening now, and we haven't listened to them, have we? What about individuals? Well, yes, there are lots of individuals out there that, with very good intentions, that are very concerned or trying to do things. I think most of us, if you ask any person, do you want the Amazonian forest to disappear? I think most of us say no. But what can we do as individuals? That's more difficult, isn't it? And governments then. Governments could really make the changes. In fact, they are the ones that are triggering the changes. But governments, public administration works at a different pace. And you've actually said that the key is time, isn't it? And and so if we have very little time, it's businesses that can help. If companies can start to spearhead this whole process, they could become more aware of what's happening, and they could be aware of the fact they have to act, and we could reach solutions. And we've made a distinction between sustainability 1.0 and sustainability 2.0. This is something that we've come up with ourselves because we've been thinking a lot about how we can make progress. Sustainability 1.0 is doing things properly. This is what we should have been doing a long time ago. We should be manufacturing with less plastic. We should make sure that the whole supply chain is sustainable. We have to make sure that all products last forever. As a company, well, I think we are one of those companies that we can certify our products and make sure that they are the most long-lasting products that exist. We do not want to generate waste. But apart from that, when we talk about sustainability and reducing emissions and doing the right thing, doing things properly, well, that tends to be all we do. We do what we are supposed to do by law. And then there are other companies that perhaps are one step ahead of legislation or what the government says. If the government says to you, oh, you have to work like this, if you have to emit like that, that's all they do. And that is the 1.0 version. What about the next version, Sustainability 2.0? I think this is the version that can really help us change things. This is essentially generosity. It means that companies, businesses, start to adopt or choose an ecosystem regeneration project. It could be land-based, it could be marine resources. In other words, they take a step forward, don't they? They stand up and say, we're going to change things for the environment. So firstly, on one level, you do things properly, you do what you have to do, and you go perhaps slightly ahead of what's expected. But then selflessly, you pick up a project and run with it to make sure you can change things. First of all, I would say that the advantages are that we're very vertical, we're very executive as companies, and we also copy each other when things go well, don't we, when one thing is successful for one company. So if companies can start to take up projects like the Mediterranean seagrass project that we heard about from Red Eléctrica, I love that project. I think it's a huge impact project. There have been very few projects like that with that ability to make things better than this one has. Well, if you have a project like that, other companies start to copy you, and we can also rally society behind us, and we can make society aware of the fact that some people are doing more because they care more, and it's worth doing more. When I go to buy a product or do anything really, first of all, I look at the reputation of the company that's produced the product, and we've also got used to talking about, for instance, child labour. It's almost as if you discover that there's a company that is actually producing using child labour. I mean, that would be dreadful, wouldn't it? We'd be shocked by that, and we wouldn't buy anything from that company. So things like that, so that people realise that it's worth doing this, that little bit more every hour. And companies, we will start copying each other too, and in very executive fashion and very direct fashion, we will start to improve the environment, because we will be doing part of the solution. We have to do the right thing, but we have to also have our own project. We have a number of projects ourselves. We have 3 projects ongoing. The first one is already at quite an advanced stage, and we thought about the fact that if we had to actually spend €1 on helping and doing something, where would we invest that euro? And we thought first of all that we would plant trees. And you said something that makes sense. We have to also live well. We're not all going to go off and live in a cave. Yes, but at the same time we have to live smartly, don't we? We have to live in a way as humans in this world that can ensure we can make a positive contribution to the planet, and we shouldn't be the only ones to benefit from us living here. It should be the planet too that benefits. So we have to live smartly, even if we have to go off to live in a cave tomorrow. If we stopped buying things and consuming things that hurt us, which is almost everything, really in our way of life. I mean, everything produces CO2. So even if we did that, our future has already been decided. We have already 416 ppb, don't we? We have sea rising, and we also have global warming, 5 degrees more than we should have had. No matter what we do, the planet will continue to warm up over, I don't know how many years, hundreds of years. But gradually, until we reach that position, our future has been signed and sealed. So what we have to do is be smart, undergo that transition, do it properly as companies, at the same time start to help to regenerate ecosystems as quickly as possible. So we have these projects. As I said, we will be planting 47 million trees in Spain every year. We're not going to do this on our own. To do this, we need help from all of the local councils and the municipal authorities in Spain, and we're going to use children and the elderly to help us in the project. That's the first project. The second one is to contribute to Posidonia oceanicus planting. Why? Because it absorbs 5 times more CO2 than the Amazon can. And we also want to foster biodiversity by repopulating species in Spain. So 3 projects ongoing, and what I hope, and if you're listening to it, that companies will move on from sustainability 1.0, move on to 2.0, and start to do everything they can do to improve things. I think that is a positive contribution, a net positive contribution that you can make, and that's my opinion on what businesses should be doing for sustainability. Oh, well, let's hope a lot of companies copy what you're doing, yes. Jose Luis, for the last 18 months, we've been in the midst of a pandemic. The climate crisis is still out there. With everything that we are going through now, do you think that we as citizens are aware of the impact and consequences of our activities? And if this pandemic has changed our minds and made us think about what we can do to change things. Well, let me see. Even before the pandemic came along, the World Health Organization, I'm not talking about Greenpeace here, I'm talking, or about the IPCC, I'm talking about the WHO. The WHO sent out its technical experts to do some research into the possible impact of the destruction of natural ecosystems on human health. About, I think it was, I don't know whether it was 1,000 experts. They weren't climatologists, they weren't geologists, they were medical practitioners who went out there to assess our impact as humans on nature and the cost in human health that would have because we're destroying ecosystems. And you can check that out. This story that I'm telling you here, it's mind-boggling. It gives you some idea of that destructive spiral, downward spiral that we as human beings are in the midst of. I think in 2018, end of 2018, they came up with a conclusion. They took almost a couple of years to come up with the conclusions, and the conclusion was that if we continued with that destruction, the outbreaks of epidemics, SARS, it was avian flu and Ebola, for instance, at the time, would occur in other places in the world, because ecosystems are our shield, really. It's almost like the Praetorian Guard that we have. It's that non-aggression pact that we had reached, that agreement we have reached with nature, but we'd gone beyond that. And I'm talking about the forest, the primary forest, and about soya plantations. You had said before that I mean, human beings would want to go out there and destroy the Amazonian forest. I mean, but unless you're Jair Bolsonaro and you're president of Brazil, I mean, maybe things start to get a bit tricky there. And by the way, he has to, and I hope that he ends up being sent to prison. He's going to have to go and appear in court. Anyway, the reports talked about sustainability. In the 2018 reports, there was a mention of perhaps a major epidemic that could be transmitted by aerosols that would affect a huge part of the population, and deaths. The word was death. This is when people react. It's not. We're not talking about lynxes or pandas here, or we're not talking about Mediterranean seagrass meadows. When you suddenly hear about fatalities and people dying, that is when people start to react. And then the pandemic hit us. And you're saying that reaction times are short. Well, look, in 2019, no, not even 2019, on the 12th of March, 2020, 2 days before the Spanish president of the government announced that we were to be locked down, if anybody had thought that the whole world would come to a standstill and everybody would have to end up staying at home, and the big companies would basically have to scale back, and they would have to actually really halt all of their machinery, and that the economy would go into recession. If anyone had come up with that idea, we'd have said, you're crazy, you're mad. So reaction times are not always that slow. The problem is that we're not looking at the biodiversity crisis and paying the same attention as we are paying to the climate change crisis and biodiversity. That is the next climate change crisis, and not just because of what the UN is saying, but because what nature is telling us. What we've seen with the pandemic, that's been in the yellow card that we've been shown by the referee, and with one yellow card, we've hit the ground. So what will happen when we're shown the red card? Are we prepared to take on that risk? That's why I think that together with climate change summits, and of course it's the 26th, it's COP26, it'll be held next week in Glasgow. We have to also pay attention to the biodiversity COPs. It's number 15 now. And we also have to pay special attention to the UICN lists of species where things change. This isn't like this quiz game when contestants get thrown out and they never come back in again. It doesn't matter if the panda is taken off the red list if the sparrow is put on it, and that is the big problem, that we as human beings and other creatures or animals, butterflies or sheep or a cricket. I mean, how long has it been since you've seen any particular these insects that shine bright in the sky at the night, fireflies? I mean, these are the things that we have to look at, and there are 3 different ways to act now. Of course, there's the institutional and the government action that can then happen. There's individual action too, but also business action. And going beyond just sort of putting together these indexes, and I'm saying that as affectionately as possible, what we have to do is accept ourselves what the environmental costs are, and we have to actually bring into our own accounting what we've always outsourced, because our accounts are false, because this economy is a big hoax. It's fake. We've been pushing out all of the treatment of waste, the loss of biodiversity. We've been kicking them off our balance sheets, but we have to bring them back into our accounting. We have to really see the value of the assets of the planet. The planet is actually the main supplier of all of the companies out there. All companies, all businesses attending this conference have a debt to nature, because their number one supplier is the planet, and the planet for a long time now has been sending out those WhatsApps and emails and tweets in all of the social media saying, you know, look at my storehouse, it's being depleted. Look at the crisis we have now, because we have, electronic transmission equipment that is lacking, and microchips. It seems the whole world is coming to standstill because we haven't got this component. But what about nature? Nature has spent decades now warning us that its stocks are running low, and we're not really accepting the value of the assets. Anyway, we don't think it belongs to nature. We think they're ours. I mean, if we're polluting waters, and if we're ransacking oceans, and we're destroying forest. Where's that on the balance sheet in the accounts of any companies? You can go to the stock exchange, look at the ABEX 35, and you can see the share performance, and you can go to their accounts, the financial statements. You never see the cost of the carbon footprint of a company. That is why the economy is all fake, it's false. So companies need to stop talking about their balance sheets and their P&L and their profits, and the big companies in this country need to start to say and think about what we want to be when we grow up, when we're older, and what do we want to actually leave as a legacy to this country. And I'm including Red Eléctrica in this. This is all about doing things properly and actually building up partnerships, because the future is all about collaboration and cooperation. And in this regard, this company has a huge opportunity to actually rally the sector behind it, and to demand that people are ethical and companies are ethical. And up to now, ethics is sadly lacking in a lot of companies in the private sector. It's time to actually strike up those partnerships and to take this challenge on and seriously, because those of us who are sitting at home reading the scientists' reports so we can actually write an article for a newspaper or give a radio or television interview, I mean, we are just finding that we feel shocked and dread. It's dreadful. This is science that we're talking about. This isn't about belief. The problem that climate change has is there's a scientific discourse that's underpinning it. The same scientific foundations that say that if I shall drop this pen, it will fall to the floor, or tomorrow the sun will rise. The same reports are telling us that if we continue with the current pace of emissions, the climate models are easy to actually draw up. More than 3.5 up to 4, or even 6 degrees Celsius as warming. And I think that you've got the IPCC interrogates that talk about the rise in temperatures up to 6 degrees, and then the planet will cease to be a place that is nice for us to live in, for us and for all the creatures around us. There's this false mantra going around that we have to save the planet. The planet has been spinning around the sun for thousands of years, with or without us on it, and it will continue to do that without us. Who's in danger? It's us, humans, and together with us are all other species that interact and live alongside us in the biosphere. So we have to call companies out. Just a year ago, I was fortunate enough to actually receive a commission to write an article on the panorama, the whole of Spanish companies with regard to circular economy. I wrote an article that I'm sure is out there still. It was published by a publication company in the private sector, and it gave me the chance to do some field work. Just when I used to be a political scientist, when I was doing some environmental work, 'cause I was an environmentalist, and I used to make notes on the different species that I kept finding. And so, with that same research method, I went out there into the market to gauge the position of companies. There are some wonderful companies out there. Of course, there are companies that are in the 19th century, the 20th century, but there are other companies that have understood straight away what's going on, not just startups in a backyard or garage, but students. You've got these kids out there, these youngsters, who are providing services, and they are the big hope for the world. And I'm not talking about the listed companies that have been able to actually interpret our reality, and they understand the position we're in now, and they've said, if we either adapt now or we're going to be on the sidelines of the market, because the environment is not simply a chip in the game that we can actually bet on. No, the environment is the board. It's the board for the game that we're playing. It's not about playing around with the environment. We can't just say, okay, I'll pay the levy, I'll pay the tax, and we can turn around that whole mantra, the watchword of the polluter pays, well, I pay so I can pollute. So those are some companies, but there are other companies that are our hope in this new productive model, which is at a very early stage of development, but it is moving forward reliably to the future. These are the companies that know what they're doing, and the fossils, I'm thinking about the functioning of the system, and also fossils in general will have to react, because there's nothing that is more static than a fossil. It doesn't move, and this is something that companies have to accept and understand. The current dynamics demand not just respect for the environment, they demand that we put the environment into our DNA. It's not about indexes and scoreboards and things. No, you tell me, what are you doing today to reduce your emissions? Don't tell me that by 2030 you'll be reducing them by so many such percent and I'll be carbon neutral by 2050. No. You tell me as a company, what are you doing this year to reduce emissions? What have you done, and what mechanisms have you set up to be able to do that? That's what it's all about. That's it. Full stop. Time's up. And that is what I think all of us should be accepting. Otherwise, how are we possibly going to get out of this situation? It requires a change. And those of us who go out there in the field day after day, we see that. And last week, and this is absolutely true, I went out to try and pick wild mushrooms near my home. They should have been there. And you know what I found? Asparagus. Spring asparagus. And I went back home, and instead of cooking my lovely wild mushrooms that I was hoping to have found, I used asparagus to make an omelette, and I felt really, really worried. And that's what's happening out there in nature. And these are the messages being sent to us by nature. And the environment isn't just another department in companies, is it? It's a cross-cutting sector and a part. It has to be like that, of course. Gretel, climate change is interlinked with the loss of biodiversity. We've seen that, and one of the commitments now is nature-based solutions. This is a possible idea for the future. How can this help? What can be done? What role can be played by nature-based solutions? Well, thank you very much for that question. I would like, perhaps, if I could, follow up on the two speakers' comments there. I can't help myself. I apologize, but let me follow up. I'm not Spanish. You probably noticed by my accent, which is not Castilian Spanish. I come from a very small country called Costa Rica. Really? Oh, I'm envious. It's a beautiful country. Thank you very much. And let me explain. A lot has been done in Costa Rica. So much has been done to try and recover our forest surface area. You've probably seen the countries doing well, but we're also very much aware of the fact that this is not enough, because just having trees is not enough. Biodiversity indices and you being good up there on the scoreboard, it's not enough either. And we're a small country, and what we have to do is make a huge contribution to emission reduction, even though we are not a large emitter, but we are committed to carbon neutrality. And you may say, in response, so what? So what? Why? If you're not a big emitter, well, yes, yes, we do have trees, and that helps us. But this is why I want to share this thought with you and make you think about it yourselves. This is all about a system in which everything is interconnected. You can't say there's just climate change on the one hand and biodiversity on the other hand. What exists? We have our planet, it's our home, we just have that one single home, and then we have climate change and biodiversity, which are the same thing. And if we continue to say that, okay, this is biodiversity on the one hand, and this is climate change on the other hand, we will never get anywhere. We will never achieve what we're trying to achieve, because everything is intrinsically, inextricably linked. Climate change affects human beings and species, and we're a species, aren't we? We're just one of those species, and all in all, if we don't understand that, I think the discourse will take us nowhere. That is the very first thing I wanted to say. And then I congratulate you on that sustainability 1.0 and 2.0 that you were talking about. I think that's great. And we are working with companies that want to come up with good conservation projects. But what I also want to say is that the role of business today, and of course, business has to do sustainability 1.0 version, to do things properly. But I would say, don't get things mixed up either. For instance, if I'm a business and I'm undertaking a conservation project, well, that's it. That's enough. My publicity, I advertise it. It's going to be a wonderful project. I'm sure it is going to be a wonderful project. But then, in my production facilities in my chain, then no, don't make me change anything there. So when we talk about business or companies, we're talking about the whole package, aren't we? And above all, we're talking about a business responsibility to do things properly. And that is absolutely fundamental, because this is yes, it's true. This goes back in over the years that companies have been investing in good conservation projects, and we congratulate on doing that, and that's great. But I think we have to go deeper than that, don't we? Much deeper. The thinking has to be deeper, and it has to be more to do with the ways that we measure those contributions in the case of climate change. How do we measure our environmental footprint, the impact on biodiversity of companies, and how can those companies become accountable and responsible for that? And that is a totally different debate, isn't it? And that is the debate that we would like to have increasingly with the private sector. How can we actually work out ways of measuring their environmental impact, and not just measurements, because for the sake of measuring things, we need to see how we can use measurements to take steps to reduce or eliminate those impact. So I wanted to say that before I answered your question, because I can't resist.
Entrando en el tema.
Now, going back to your question about biodiversity, what I'd like to say is that 5 steps that were mentioned yesterday, and we have mentioned them today again. We are in a critical moment. That's step number 1. Second, we know what we need to do. We're not discussing what to do. Everybody, absolutely everybody knows what needs to be done, and we do have the tools. And the third issue is there's no time. This is not something that we can discuss endlessly and repeating time and again everything that we've heard endless times. No, time is of the essence to take the necessary steps. Now that the COP26 will be held next week, and everything, everywhere, you hear okay, countries are more ambitious. I mean, of course, I mean, we are more ambitious. Everybody wants to be more ambitious, but what is behind those words, more ambition, to be more ambitious? And that's where my answer to your question lies. At the IUCN, we have been working for over a year and over a decade, rather, on nature-related issues. And some months ago, the Nature is, I don't know whether everybody's familiar with it, but it's a very prestigious magazine. And they published an issue saying that nature-related solutions were equivalent to 10 gigatons per year in terms of emission savings. So that comparison, those gigatons, they are exactly the same as the emissions of the world transport sector. So it's not nature-based solutions as something that is a term that is just the hype right now. No, we are speaking about solutions working with nature in order to reduce emissions, and that can be measured, actually measured. So, and that's key, because sometimes people use that term, nature-based solutions, but it's not. They don't really understand what's behind it. So this is why we recently launched a standard for nature-based solutions. It's a standard that tells us whether you, in the private sector, public sector, or the community, whether your solution is actually a nature-based solution and how this can be measured in practice. So we have developed this tool and we are implementing it right now, and that's essential, because anything else can be called a nature-based solution, and that's not the case. And I believe that this is essential. We need to be able to implement a standard to actually understand what's the impact of this nature-based solutions, and so we can actually implement them and make the most of them. There are certain examples now. For instance, mangroves. If you have mangroves, the number of lives that can be saved in coastal regions, for instance, in coastal areas, how many green jobs we generate just by taking care of those mangroves. Just to give you some specific examples of what's at stake. Of course, not all jobs are green jobs, and not everything is related to the economy, and I like to make this abundantly clear. Nothing will work if it's not ascribed to the sustainability triangle. Sustainability is social, it's environmental, it needs to be fair. These nature-based solutions need to be socially beneficial for those communities that are the most vulnerable to climate change. You mentioned the IUCN's Red List of endangered species. Well, that's one of our most popular labels, the most famous labels. But now we have this standard for nature-based solutions. But it's quite a sad thing to see that whenever we update the Red List status, and it's always the loss of species after loss of species, and we try to give you good news, but we can't, because the reality is very challenging. I remember that every once in a while we can give you some good news. Some species that used to be in danger, they are no longer in that situation, but unfortunately it is very seldom the case. Well, maybe one day it will have to be announced that our species is no longer there. It's only a few of us remaining and standing, and yeah, and that's what's at stake right now. See, what I'd like to say is, time is one of the issues here. we need to be doing things in practice, to doing them on the ground, on the field. And we need to see what everybody's doing, how we can measure it, how we can verify what it is being done. Now, the governments will be attending the Conference of the Parties on climate change. They will be covering very many topics, for instance, carbon markets, and no double accounting. It can be allowed. I hope that is made clear. And you can't say, well, okay, the company is marketing their reductions, or bought some reductions or some, and then the country does not take them into account, and they will count them twice. So, well, I mean, double accounting is something we need to be dealing with. But so but now at this very critical time, we are also very positive. We are also very optimistic. We need to believe that we are able to change things. Otherwise, well, then just let's forget about everything and go and live in a cave. Well, maybe not even there, because we will not even have caves to live in. But we are working on this. We are generating the tools for the public sector, the private sector, society as a whole can do things right, because we believe it is possible to do that. We need to be aware, not only, we need to believe not only in the capacity for regeneration of the planet, but also we need to believe in humankind. We've gone through very difficult times with COVID. Here in Spain, you really had a hard time, but also in very many other places in the world. And now we are speaking about recovery plans. Many countries have them, not all of them, though. You do. Yesterday I heard several times, we do have the resources. Do you know how lucky you are to be able to say that? Have you ever thought about it? You said it so casually yesterday, well, we do have the resources, we do have the means. Well, that's wonderful. They don't realize how lucky they are. And every time you said, okay, we do have the means, we do have the resources, well, then this is a wonderful and extraordinary opportunity. If you have the means, you have the resources, then you can do this green and inclusive transition the right way. You need to realize this great opportunity you now have. Let's not only speak about, this is a challenging situation, these times are difficult. No, you have the opportunity to do things right. And, looking from the outside, looking in, I think that you are in a wonderful position, in a wonderful time to do things. And I'd like to encourage you to try and work together, to try and look for those tools that make private businesses to be recognized because of the good actions they have carried out and their planning. Let's find these winning companies that will actually, disseminate and contaminate everybody with contagious energy. We need to remember that every single human being is playing a fundamental role here. Not some of us, but not all of us. This is not an option. This is not something that I will do if I want. No, it's not something that, it's not an option anymore. This is not optional anymore. This is a race where everybody needs to be involved. Okay, now speaking about time, well, we have actually run out of time in this panel, and if you, so we need to wrap up. If I allow, okay, just give me a headline, Jaime. Okay, so you take up the challenge, and sustainability in your company. How do you do this vis-a-vis the consumers as well, so the consumers can actually differentiate between who is sustainable and who is not? Okay, we are investing everything in doing, not speaking, not talking, just doing. Some companies speak a lot and say a lot, but they don't do much. But we are doing just the opposite. we have also spoken with many different companies, with many ministers, many different CEOs, lots of people. The fourth vice president, the third vice president of the government have gone through and have come to us because they know it, and they know what we're doing, because we want to do things, not to talk about them. There's one, you say, and that's the difference between just plain sustainability or sustainability 2.0, and just one headline. And in the decade, the 2010, from 2010 to 2020, this has been the digitalization decade. Everything went digital. Everything has become digital, and it will continue in the future. But from 2020 to 2030, this will be the sustainability decade. And I'm not saying this because I have a crystal ball or because I know more than everybody else, but because there is no other alternative. We have no choice. Either we take this very seriously and everybody starts to contribute to this. I mean, we are doing what we can, but we are just a small company, and we try to do the right thing, and then we cannot do much more than that. But we need to join forces, the private forces, public forces, individual forces, society as a whole, to change things, and to change them very quickly and very effectively. Otherwise, we will not have a plan B. So, Jose Luis, I think the headline, it was, I mean, you just gave it, you just left it there, I think this is the headline that for this conference. You said, everybody here knows what they're talking about. Everybody, we all know what we're talking about. I mean, we can try and, lose ourselves in, technological details or financial details, economic details, but everybody is aware of the fact that everybody knows that we are living in this red moment, as the IPCC said, in time. So everybody knows what's at stake. Everybody knows what's at stake. So I'd like to I remember the Professor Graham Brundtland was in her famous report on sustainable development. That was, but my grandmother Maria, in a small town in Cuenca, explained sustainability to me at a very early age. She said, "Son, if you want to eat eggs every day, you can't actually put the hen in the oven." And we are now trying to, we have grabbed the hen by the neck, let's not be as stupid as to kill it. So thank you all very much. Thank you very much. Let's take a break. For those that are following us, so those of you that are following us through streaming, we will be back at 12:15. And now let's go for a coffee break. Thank you all very much.
Bienvenidas.
Welcome back. Now we've had our coffee break, we're going to move on to an absolutely essential issue, which is climate change. This is, of course, the biggest challenge that we're facing as a species, and of course for the planet as well. And things are moving faster than we ever expected, or more than we were afraid. Of course, climate change has all sorts of different facets, environmental, social, economic, and the longer we wait to act, the more investment we'll have to make, and it's even more expensive, I think, more costly to be able to act if we wait. So we're going to be holding a panel session now on climate emergency, the future is now. We have 4 experts with us. Let me invite them to come up and join me here. Ricardo Garcia is the board member of the Red Eléctrica Group. Eva Salandani is director of Greenpeace Spain. Welcome to both of you. You can come up to the stage. And we have Maria Mendeluzi, who will be connected online. She's CEO of We Mean Business Coalition. I think she should be able to hear us. She unfortunately couldn't be here in person with us today. And just before the start of the climate change conference, which will be held in November in Glasgow, we have Gonzalo Munoz, who is the high-level climate action champion for the COP25 and COP26 too. Gonzalo wanted to send us a message so that he could remind us of the crucial moment in time now and the essential role of businesses. They will have to be part of the solution. So let's hear Gonzalo and see the video first. Over recent days, we have once again seen a report that's absolutely emphatic from science, and we've received this same report yet again because there's nothing new. We are in the midst of a climate emergency. We need to act urgently. We need to reduce our air emissions as soon as possible, because this all has to happen before 2025. That's emission reduction, and renewable energies are key here for that emission reduction target. We're seeing this globally, how renewable energies are becoming cheaper. They can be scaled up, and they are now aligned with this race to have net zero emissions before 2015. And all of this has taken us to this key moment in time for the role of businesses. A lot of them have to commit, they have engaged, they have committed to installing their own renewable energy facilities. Others are buying renewable energies from the electricity market, putting pressure on our energy and electricity systems and their patterns. But more than that, they are triggering this ambition loop that we call it all over the world. When companies are aligned with this purpose, they're sending out the right message, a necessary message to authorities at all levels of government. They're saying that you should also in turn commit to everything that we are incumbent to do by the Paris Agreement, and because science is telling us to do. This is a critical year. It's a year in which we're not just trying to get out of the crisis, COVID, and build better for the future, but we also have to deal with climate change, and we have to scale up renewable energies as well as preventing and putting a stop to environmental degradation and working on restoration and regeneration. 2021 is the critical year, the crucial year. All companies have to be aligned here. That is why a lot of us are already in that race to zero, as it's called, and we're also in the race to resilience, which is also seeking to strengthen resilience to the climate emergency, the climate crisis of 4 billion people. So all of us, all of companies and individuals have to be vigilant here. A lot of us have been surprised by the IPCC report. We have to all join this race to zero, race to resilience. We have to all contribute, act immediately to do what we can to resolve the climate crisis. Don't waste the opportunity. Don't let time go by. Don't end up being in the history page, not part of the solution but part of the problem. Thank you very much, Gonzalo, for that video. I think he's stated it very clearly. We have to reduce emissions. We have to do that right now. This is the time to act, and we can't let another year go by. All of us have to be a part and parcel of the solution. So with us on this panel session. We have Ricardo Garcia, who is a board member of the Red Eléctrica Group, and I think each panelist will be making a short presentation. Let's see if we have time after that for some Q&A and a dialogue. So, Ricardo, are you ready to start? Let's see if we can have the remote control for him to be able to share his presentation and his slides with you. Thank you very much. If you could hand that up to us.
Y ahora podemos empezar con unas presentaciones. Yo creo que ya viene por aquí. Muchas gracias. Gracias.
Gracias. Okay. No sé dónde tengo que...
¿A dónde tiene que apuntar?
I don't know where I have to point. There? There we are. We can see it, but we hear, but not there. Oh, yeah, now we can. Well, good morning. Good afternoon. Thank you all very much. In particular, thanks to the chair and the team at Red Eléctrica for giving me this opportunity to share with you some reflections on the present situation, on climate change and the impact it can have on businesses. So, along the lines of the title of this panel, the name of this panel, the future is here. Well, is here to stay. That's what I would add. So, yesterday we mentioned the need for quality information, to obtain quality data. This is essential for companies in sustainability terms. Let's see the data behind this analysis here. What you can see there, it's quite a popular chart in terms of climate change. I mean, it's quite widely known. Each bar in this graph, in this chart, is the average temperature in a given year on the planet. Then lighter greens, darker greens is colder temperatures, lighter greens warmer, and then the more reddish and dark red it gets, it's the hottest temperatures. That's the consolidated scientific information. The first part comes from a database, a NASA database on global temperatures. And the next part is the simulations that were run for the first edition of the IPCC, and the third would correspond to the 22nd century. It would be the continuation of those projections. So first reading, the first glance. So we are evolving towards a situation that seems self-evident. The planet is warming up. But then, behind all this, you can see details that are quite relevant. For instance, you can see here what happens more or less over there in the next 30 years, that box there. If you can see this, there's four alternatives, four choices, four branches. It's the four different scenarios depending on on how emissions go. The top is the situation where we are compliant with the Paris Agreement, and then at the bottom you see what we have, what is called the RCP 8.5, which is around an increase of around 6 degrees Celsius in temperature. But wherever we go, wherever we look at, still we are in the red. That we have to do many things, but very often we don't see the effects because the inertia in the climate change and the climate system is so great that the effects remain in the atmosphere for at least 50 years. So we won't be seeing the effects until a very long time goes by. So yesterday we heard about businesses and their need for stability, and that's what investors want. But, that's wishful thinking, because what the climate system is telling us is that until the end of this century, we will not reach a stability situation. So the scenario, what is the scenario ahead of us? To have more or less intense warming, be it even if it's less intense or more intense, it's still changing. The system will be changing constantly. It will change less if we are able to reach agreements such as the Paris Agreement, and it will change faster and more in a more decisive way if we are not able to do that. But the system is change. That the stationary situation will never happen. So this is look at the difference between the different scenarios. We are here, for instance, in the next 30 years, everybody will be, we will be warming up by half a degree. Each tenth of a degree is important. Each tenth of a degree matters here, because the extremes, because it's an average, but the extremes with a much higher impact, they are increasing far more rapidly than the average value. So in this 30-year scenario, where everything will remain the same, regardless of what choices we make, the effects of climate change will be increasing substantially. And to conclude, there's no turning back. None of these scenarios take us back to the good times, to the good old times, with the good old green times, what used to be considered the standard weather, that standard climate, that we will never recover. And this is something that we need to take very much into account. Of course, the planet is warming up, yes, but it is warming up in this way. And this has practical consequences, and it will affect both the private and public sectors. So this is the latest report from IPCC. What you see here is the increase, the temperature increase worldwide, depending, according to the different scenarios, 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees. The IPCC report, by the way, says that before 2040, we will already be reaching 1.5 degrees. So if we are lucky and we are successful, we will be in the middle. That will mean reaching the 2 degrees increase that we agreed in Paris. So if we're lucky, it's the scenario in the middle. But what really you really need to look at in this picture is the inequalities, is the inequality in the dissemination or in the effects. So because we are considering the global scale of climate change, but impact will not be equally distributed everywhere. So this is an inequality driver that is underlying all the situation, and how, I mean, the more intense or the stronger it is, the stronger the inequalities will become. And that's what's interesting about this picture. But then, I don't know if you are able to see in this next second picture this brownish spot that reaches from the Caribbean till Europe, and this is the decrease in rainfall, and reaches up to Spain in the worst case scenario. So Spain, we are in a hotspot. We are in an area where we will be suffering climate change impacts more severely. This is scientific reason. We are located between the subtropical areas in medium latitude, so changes will we will suffer more severely the changes than they will in Central Europe. So the same thing applies to droughts. The drought will be affecting us very severely, although the whole Mediterranean area will be affected, and that's a major impact on water resources for all of us. Yesterday we were told about stress tests. One stress test carried out by the European Investment Bank. So here you can see the percentage of companies that will be exposed to physical risks during this transition. The red spot there, blue spot there, it's Spain, Portugal, Greece. So you can see how the physical situation, physical factors will be having an important influence on this stress test results and how they will be affecting or having an influence on the businesses' performances. So the key here is to try to really having this very much in mind and interiorizing these elements. These things are not going to change. We need to accept this. We need to accept this and forget about, this is not the way I used to work. This is because this is not business as usual. The future that's coming is climate change, less rainfall, less water resources, more energy will be going up to the atmosphere, and it will remain there, but it will start moving in a more dramatic way with a more extreme weather episodes and a heavier rainfall in some places and flash floods and, of course, a warmer planet. This is because of the inertia in this system. The inertia in the system, it is what it is. Unless we have a technological leap that we can, achieve. We don't have it now. That allows us to reduce CO2 in the atmosphere globally drastically. This is what is going to happen. So in the next 50, 60 years, what's coming is already there. So we are already aware, we are already noticing climate change, and it's only, several tenths of a degree that we have experienced. Just imagine going up this ladder 4 or 5 more steps further. The frequency of extreme weather events. So we will be increasingly vulnerable because our exposure is going to be much greater. So things that used to happen once in a century, now they will happen 10 times in a century. Things that we only had read about now become things that are likely to happen. So the social perception of risk is also going to be greater, and this is an important driver for change, and it makes us and that forces us to be much more receptive to all this and to integrate all this, to be more demanding. We are going down a road that is anything but positive. So what we will be needing necessarily will be more regulation, because the regulation will need to be constantly changing. As if the landscape is ever changing, then regulation will need to adapt, and that is not a handicap. We must not see this as a handicap, but just one more chip in the game, one more factor, one more rule. And then we need to not only focus on transition, but also on stepping up adaptation, because in these next few years we could follow one of the 4 paths that we saw earlier. If the situation is evolving towards the bottom, to greater risks, then we will need to reinforce transition with a further adaptation, because we will have become more vulnerable, more extreme adverse events. The population will keep growing. So it's not only a question of transition, it's a question of adaptation, because that's how the system is evolving. So we will need to be changing the way our companies operate. Climate change now is frequently reduced to just a mere risk assessment, but it's not only that, it goes much further beyond that. It's a is actually a paradigm shift. And I need to integrate that into my way of going about things. If I only do this, once in a while, I will not have the good approach. Because if I I must face an extreme situation, then I will not be duly prepared. So preparedness is essential because the rules of the game will be constantly changing with climate change. And then a couple of remarks to conclude. Can we suffer climatic fatigue? Because just after 1 hour and a half of COVID, we are speaking about COVID fatigue. But after 30 years, what happens after 30 years of climate crisis? How can you manage an emergency that lasts 30 years? I don't think that's possible. We need to look at it in different terms. So, several years ago, the question was, is this real? I mean, is climate change actually happening or not? But now we have turned a page. We are speaking about climate change or climate emergency, but, just trying to manage or to handle 30 years in an emergency state or situation. Well, it's mind-boggling. I mean, you cannot be in an emergency situation for 30 years. We need to generate new concepts, new terms in which to look at the situation. People, say, okay, I'd like to work in a stationary system. Yes, but the system is not going to be stationary in the next 30 to 40 years. So you need to have this clearly in mind. And I think that's, the ideas that we need to remember. Okay, thank you for your clarity. Climate change is science, and you have been very clear, and you have explained this very clearly. And we are a vulnerable country, and every month, we see that challenges that only happen once in a while now have become more the norm than the exception. So we have Maria Mendeluza here. Welcome. She has a short presentation. Maybe you can share your screen with us, Maria. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. And I would have loved to be there with you. But unfortunately, the virtual and in-person meetings have not adjusted yet. I've really liked Ricardo's presentation. It has made abundantly clear that the tremendous issue that we have to face. We know COVID very well now because there's been a lot of science done, and it's the same thing that is happened with the climate. There has been a lot of research, a lot of investigations and studies, and that's essential for businesses. Businesses, they need to know what environment they are operating in, and this climate change is the major mistake, the major problem caused by humankind, and we need to do what we can to solve it. And I'm going to focus now on climate change and the way it affects Spain much more than other countries, and also the opportunities that it presents us with. We are quite concerned because in 10 days we'll be going to Glasgow. It's going to be a major conference. The G20 will be held some days before, and then we will have COP26. It's not going to be as large as an event as it was in Paris, but it's essential because the NTCs will need to be submitted by all different countries. Many countries have already submitted them. The most committed is Europe, and then we have other countries like the US and the UK that have made major commitments, others not so ambitious. But one of the main elements in this meeting, in this conference, will be to try and maintain and keep alive this 1.5 degree scenario after taking a look at the scenarios that we have just been shown by Ricardo, well, we will try and not to give up and try to pursue this goal, to keep it alive. This is what the International Energy Agency, the Secretary General of the UN, the UN Secretary General, as well as the UK government. Then the roadmap, the Paris roadmap will be also discussed, and also the emissions trade and other issues, important issues, will be discussed during the summit. Then some developed countries had committed to provide 100 billion of US dollars to developing countries, and those commitments have not yet been met. But around the COP26, there are many different other initiatives going in parallel, private, public initiatives, NGOs. First one is a campaign to stop investing in coal. Many countries have already decided not to keep investing in coal, and so 2030 is the deadline for investing in coal. It will be for the developed world, and for the developing world, 2050, to stop subsidizing fossil fuels, to put a price on carbon. We cannot keep on subsidizing carbon. Then TCSB and nature will also be a central topic. As Ricardo said, the concentration of emissions in the atmosphere, it's a problem that has to do with the stock, not the flow. So we need to get rid of the emissions in the air using different technologies, but one that we know it's been working for millions of years is nature. So what can we do there? I'm leading a coalition of 7 different companies working on climate change. If companies are committed with the fight against climate change, this gives the trust. This gives trust to the governments to actually be able to be more ambitious in regulation as well. So one of the initiatives that we've seen is Business Ambitions. Business Ambitions is one of our initiatives, Business Ambitions 1.5, to align our goals with this reduction. There are 100 companies that have committed to do this, large multinational corporations. And you can see the levels here. In Spain, it's 31 companies. And these companies are also asking the G20 by means of a letter that we have coordinated, signed by over 80 countries. They are telling the G20 these 5 things that we are requesting from the COPs. The British, the Americans, and the EU are the most active in what we call advocacy, which that is trying to push governments and public powers to do things. The US, the UK, the EU are the most ambitious players here, with their targets for emissions reductions in the next few years. So our technology works. Now, what we need is to expand that to have a much greater reach and much greater footprint. Last week, we launched a new initiative to bring on board SMEs. Around 2,500 SMEs have now joined this project, and these SMEs are committed to reduce their emissions. The vast majority say they can do this before 2030. The vast majority also come from the UK. But now I hope that now that it's just being presented in Spain, you can help me bring an increasing number of SMEs on board, because those companies, those businesses that are committed to to bring down their emissions, they do it for several reasons, because many of their employees are demanding just that. They want to attract, businesses want to attract talent, and so companies need to have very high standards vis-a-vis the climate change, nature, biodiversity, and that attracts talent. In many projects in Glasgow, we have a very direct and active involvement for businesses to step up their climate change roadmap. Now that Europe and the US intend to bring down their emissions by 50% in the next 8 years, there will be a lot of new regulation coming up in the next few years. They will be very closely scrutinized and reviewed by activists and different organizations, because we do have a lot of information and we can actually know who's doing the right thing and who is not. Now, out of these companies that are aligned to this business ambition of 1.5, they are aligned with other things as well, but out of their own, as far as their own emissions and their own power consumption, companies are doing quite well, reasonably well. But what happens is their supply chains. Supply chains amount to 95% of their emissions, and so this is so companies need to work with their suppliers and their vendors, and this is why this initiative is so important. I've been leading this initiative since for a year and a half. It was funded in 2014. So we tell companies that they need to be business leaders, and for that they need to do first things. They need to have the SBTI, Business Ambition Climate Pledge, for instance. They need to have this framework, and that is clearly defined, and that ambition needs to be followed by actions. There are many initiatives in this regard. Here in Spain, we are funding initiatives such as AB 100. They are companies that say that they're going to be 100% renewable, such as Google, Amazon, etc. EB 100, it's the same thing, but with EV 100 is the same thing, but for electric vehicles. We are doing this with other companies as well, companies that are committing to buying zero-emission supplies, and that is for steel companies and for concrete production companies. They have, and they do need to know that the supplies is zero emissions. That's important for them. Then advocacy. Businesses need to be consistent in their strategy. You cannot simply have a 1.5 goal and then be against the action, the package, the measures and the package of measures that is just being discussed in the U.S. Activists are also looking very closely to the companies in how they contribute to a positive dialogue with governments. And then finally, we have accountability. We know after discussions, we're in discussions with many different companies, the companies we work with, over 1,200. When companies have goals, and that is then conveyed to their top management and to the rest of the organization, and those they are, if that is trickled down, the change is much swifter. And that also has a spillover effect, because rivals, our competitors, they also try and do the same. So, well, this is what I wanted to ask you, to tell you about. There are a lot of things to be done in Spain. Here, as a Spaniard myself, you have an ally in me. here in Geneva. But we are also very much interested in having Spanish companies that are leading Spanish companies, highly visible in the international scene, to be leaders in climate change as well. Well, thank you very much, Maria, for your comments. And regarding what you were saying about the value chain, the supply chain, that companies do what they can within themselves, but also with regard to the supply chains, because we have seen that many countries are not very interested in this issue. For instance, China, and there's a lot to do in that regard as well. So Eva Saldaña, she is CEO of Greenpeace. Now it's your turn, your presentation, and hopefully we'll have some minutes left for discussion later on for Q&A.
Bueno, lo primero, muchas gracias.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. Thank you for asking me to bring to this stage the voice of civil society. Thank you to Red Eléctrica for holding this conference, which is very important. I do think so. I want to keep my remarks short because I think there's a lot to be got out of our exchange, our dialogue later on, because we are different actors in this whole scenario. It's interesting to talk together. Ricardo, I think, has given us the background, the context. Climate change is here today. It's an emergency here today. It's not something that will happen. It is happening. And it's not just something that the scientific community is talking about. They've been talking about it for more than 10 years. We're 10 years behind. We have a 10-year delay to catch up, and that means that we have the ecological transition to make, and we should have been doing it 10 years ago. That is also important to note. It's also important to understand that we're still in time. That is another key message for you. Let's act, and let's act urgently and with the ambition that is needed in this situation. We've seen the last IPCC report that came out in August, of course, with all of the data that Ricardo was explaining to us, and they talked about red alert for humankind. That's important. It is not just the fact that we're seeing this information in the report. We're seeing it in the reality all around us. Canada, 40 degrees Celsius this summer. We're seeing wildfires in even Russia. We've seen more than 500 fires in Spain and floods in Germany. This is the reality. It's all around us. It's happening now. And just as Ricardo was saying, we will see the pace more intense as in the next few years. So it's time for us to really put our backs into it and do something. We're also seeing some exciting things out there. Maria was talking about what people are doing and what's happening. It's the market, yes, it is. Yes, hello. Yes, I'm just saying hello to you in the audience who go yes. The market is telling us the direction to go, and then the obsolete assets in a system that is really worthless, which is the fossil fuel business. For the last 5 years, are making losses. Perhaps it's wrong for me to say this. It sounds terrible, but seeing the market, is pushing in the right direction now. It's behind us, and then if you look at the Hague, the ICC, it's actually brought out a ruling against Shell. They have to make reductions of up to 45% in business plans, and this is something that's happening now. Exxon as well. We're seeing how that shareholders are now joining these companies that have a different view on things. So things are being shaken up, but they have to be shaken up. How quickly will we move in the right direction? How much ambition is there? We'll have to see now, because you've got the narratives, two different narratives competing, the different streams of thought as well. And here I am as Greenpeace talking you to, but it's not just me anymore. It's the government and the business world saying the same thing. So maybe I don't even need to be here now. But we have to be very careful with this space and see if there's a gap between words and deeds. Every percentage or fraction of a percentage, as we've heard, matters. And we're also seeing how young people are starting to rally around the cause. Perhaps the pandemic has brought things to a standstill a bit, but Ricardo was talking about climate fatigue, but we're also seeing how young people are reacting to the lack of action from governments, and they're saying, is there a future for us or not? They are looking at what is going to happen to their own lives. I'd like to perhaps look at the positive side. Yes, there is time. We can do things. We can act. It's important for us to look at the money avalanche that is going to come from Europe with our national budget here in Spain. What are we going to do with all of that money? It's the very first time that we have all of those streams, revenue streams that can help us undertake this major change. We've been analysing our plan in Spain, which is called España Puede, Spain Can. We think it's time for us to have a green and just, fair recovery, just as is set out by European frameworks. This should be something that is left to the people to do. Let's look at the Spanish government's plans, we said. There are lots of different types of plans. We've got the 2030 agenda. We've also got the 2050 look ahead and this particular plan, which is called Spain Can. It's interesting, 40% there is earmarked for climate, environment, but there are also some gaps, some shortcomings in this particular plan. What have we identified there? I would say watch out here and be careful here with our agri-food business. That particular sector also contributes to emissions, but it's been left out of all of the plans. So we're overlooking it completely. And we should remember that. It's important to remember that sector. We're also seeing that this does not ensure that we can actually undertake that ecological transition. Let's see what the money can do. Let's see whether it can actually lead us to a real reduction in emissions. There are other factors. The economy, public investment is being pushed up again. That's interesting. Then facilities for SMEs. That's important to have reduction here. What is it? 80-something, 90% of our business fabric are SMEs. So the money shouldn't just be channeled to the big companies. If we are going to have this recovery and explore other areas, then money should go to the SMEs, because the big companies have sufficient financial clout to be able to do things on their own. These are also important points. And one risk there is for this not to actually end up being levied on the people who should be paying the tax for it, the polluter pays principle. Then there's the social side to this. For instance, gender. In a country like Spain, where the feminist movement has done some wonderful work for gender equality, I think gender equality is very much part of what happens. But the part about carers and the care sector, I mean, that has been left out. We also have to remember how much value we have to attach to that. We've been through a pandemic. We know just how much it matters to have the carers in our society, and so the possible losses there on the side of working rights there. And then governance. There's the whole heading of governance. We have to make sure that as actors in the process, we need to be striking up a dialogue, we need to be participating, we need to have some checks and balances, accountability. Maria said that, didn't she? We need to have proper checks and balances, proper reports to ensure that there is that gap I was talking about between words and deeds. We have to cut down that gap and see what is really happening at that. It's not just about having a beautiful green logo or brand to look at. It's pretty important to have more than that. I think the financial side, the money that is coming in has to be used to, of course, help us to overcome the damage that we have suffered because of COVID. It's been a disruptive pandemic, and we need to remember that we had an environmental crisis even before the pandemic. We had inequalities there that are still there. Where are the focuses of this new investment? remember, I said that we had a fossil fuel-based obsolete system. So one key focus is the 100% renewable energy ecological transition. It needs to be efficient. It's not just about technology. It's not just about technology companies. It's also about having an inclusive, fair, and democratic society. So a huge part of that package of money has to be earmarked for the transition, the energy system, and the electricity market, etc. Those, of course, are two big areas, energy efficiency, infrastructures and housing, particularly to help the more vulnerable families, because these are people who might be able to afford to make the changes. We might be able to make the changes in this transition, but others can't. Then there are other equally important areas, but the financing packages may not be going to these areas so much, transport and mobility. It's not all about the electric car. We have to transform our mobility. We have to use public transport more. There's a train service as well, which is so important in Europe. Agriculture farming, I was talking about that before, livestock farming as well. We have a devastating industrial system there for livestock farming. Let's turn it into something much more sustainable, where we are losing out all the rural community and the rural population. They're losing out because we have a system that basically lays the countryside to waste. Taxation, innovation, democracy, and this has to also be part and parcel of regulation and transformation as part of this European framework with this global governance. Of course, we need to have a transition in the employment area, in the job market. Let's do that. Let's see if we can actually reskill people, those people who were working in previously big sectors, such as we did it with the coal industry, and let's take them to new sectors for jobs. There's some figures here for you. As I said, I wanted us to have a dialogue if we could, but you can see the transformation of the energy system and the calculations that we have made. This is a study that we put forward. It's called Turn the System Around. You can see the figure there for the number of millions that will go into the energy system, and then another 52 million euros, so 53 and 52 million. Now, these are the major areas, public and private financing together. A lot of job creation, changing the economy, and then the other sectors, you can see the figures I've got, and then they're not so high, but they are good. And then in the center, in the focus, and I'm going to say this again, and I'm going to repeat this over and over again, you've got civil society in the center. This change will not be possible without civil society. The civil society, we need to realize that we are part of the solution. We have to jump on board, and we have to believe in ourselves. We have to believe that we are the ones who can change the system. We will stop being passive consumers, and we will become part of the solution production. That change will not be a change without civil society. That's why I say in the middle of that circle. And I'll stop there. Well, thank you very much, Eva. And we do have 10 minutes left for us to talk together. Maria's still out there. On the screen. Ricardo, I wanted to ask you about Red Eléctrica. What contribution can you make to this transition that is ongoing? I think quite obviously the first change is change our mission. If Red Eléctrica is not able to actually accompany the changes in climate with the electricity system, so it's more based on renewable energies and it draws more on other sources of energies as well as managing all these new complexities, well, things will never work. I'm absolutely convinced about that. But that the company will be able to do all of this. And then there is another contribution that we can make, and that comes from our own policies. We saw yesterday how the company is involved in every single vector of sustainable, and that we are proactive there. We're not waiting for regulation, obligation to make us do things. We are taking on the problems and addressing them beforehand. this is definitely a good example that we're setting, but more than that, I think we are having perhaps a pull effect, bringing behind us other companies that are in the sector too. That is perhaps the most important contribution that we can make. A company that plays a pivotal role in the energy transition and is doing so proactively and consistently, because what businesses need, what companies need, is to be more proactive. If we're just going to sit back and wait for regulation to come along and tell us what to do, then we'll be late. We'll be late. Yes, of course. You won't adapt it in time and you won't be integrating properly. Maria, we're just a couple of weeks away from COP26. What can we expect from COP26? We as journalists are always are hoping that we can get the headlines from this definitive event, and we'll see solutions come up. What do you expect? Well, I would hope that some of these countries will make announcements during the COP. China, India, big countries that have to do something about climate change. And let's hope there will be a powerful message from the world of finance, from the business world, because they are starting to rally around the cause. And then what you've been talking about, civil society, the role of civil society is important. Like Greenpeace can help there to make people much more aware and better informed about the possibilities of transition. There are other issues, and I'm sure that they will come up. What about energy prices that are still very high? If we can we could, whether we should be trying to solve short-term problems with long-term solutions. There'll be a lot of talk about renewables, about hydrogen, and about how we have to strengthen distribution channels and ensure we can overcome the problems of intermittent energy. There will be headlines and there'll be stars. I'm sure there'll be a very exciting time, I think, over the next couple of weeks. Well, let's hope that we can hear commitments and agreements from countries. Ever, you're talking about civil society. What about consumers? Do you think consumers have enough information, they're educated enough, and they're aware of their role in this? So what's missing? What do they need? What do we need to be more aware of what's happening? Well, the research that has been done internationally, those studies have told us, and these studies in post-pandemic times have told us that people are more aware now. The percentage there is higher for awareness of sustainability, particularly of social issues. There is some attempt there to be aware, but it doesn't always match up with our behavior. There is this gap between what we say we're worried about and then the shopping that we end up doing, the products that we buy. Sometimes there is no intention there. Sometimes it's because maybe as a shopper, a consumer, I don't quite understand the linkage between sustainability and the product that I'm being offered. So there's a lot of work that can be done there by companies, by government and organizations to help there. And then there's a price issue, isn't there? Of course, we have a market out there, products that are not properly embedding real cost. For instance, there's a T-shirt that I could buy for €3 and I could buy 20 of them for the whole year. But maybe I should start to think about buying one single T-shirt, better quality T-shirt, which has been made with not just sustainability criteria, but other social criteria. It's not from the other side of the world, and the working conditions of the workers who are making that T-shirt aren't so precarious and so insecure. So this is where awareness, this is advocacy. A lot can still be done. And governments perhaps maybe have to set a cap on production for businesses, as well as regulating advertising that is done for certain products so that we don't confuse consumers. As I said, is this green, eco-friendly? What's behind it all? There's a lot of publicity out there, there's labeling and tagging. Everything needs to be consistent. We need to ensure that there is proper product traceability. And consumers, too, shoppers, need to be able to think about what contribution they can make and where they can make the contribution, because of course consumption, this is something we do in lots of different places. Maybe I could think about changing my electricity company, or changing the way that I produce things, or change what I buy for clothing so it's more sustainable. There are things that we can do. There's a lot of room for further awareness to be raised. We've reached a better point, I think, but we need to take one step further and make sure that we can change the market as consumers. And we can set out the direction to be taken depending on what we buy. Well, to finish off, I do apologize, but I'm a journalist and I want a headline from you. Recovery. It's the title is the recovery from the ESG perspective. What do you think it should be like, this new recovery? Recovery needs to be active. And we shouldn't have to wait for any external momentum. I think with the information that's available to us, we should actually reach the destination and be consistent, because we know that the system is complex, and that means decisions are not easy to take, and that the environment is not going to be stationary. That's the environment we have to operate in. Let's hope that businesses who are listening to it can be proactive to be able to adapt to what is ahead of us. Maria, what would be your headline for recovery here? Post-COVID recovery? Yes, post-COVID, post-pandemic recovery, and with this climate transition that we have ahead of us. The climate transition is a huge business opportunity for companies and individuals. Eva, what about you to finish off? What would be your headline? I would say a green, fair recovery in the hands of individuals with a transition that is good for the planet and for life. And let's not cheat at all here on the part of businesses. Well, thank you very much to all three of you for joining us this morning. Maria, thank you for also joining us, if not here in person, but online. So let's move on to the next panel session. Let's have a switch around here. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I would like the next speakers to come up. We have the Secretary of State for the Environment, Humaran, and the former Minister for the ecological transition in France. Thank you very much for joining us. We've been talking about the fundamental role of businesses, companies that are so committed. Yes. That can be an example for their suppliers. We've been talking about how important traceability is for those products that we have on our supermarket shelves, and whether we as consumers and shoppers can check whether they are sustainable products or not, as well as the role of consumers ourselves. When we get up in the morning, we take environmental decisions right from the moment when we switch on the light and the radio, when we go into the shower and we prepare our breakfast. At every single moment during the day, we're taking environmental decisions, and I think consumers have a fundamental role, don't they?
Bon, après.
Bueno, pues bienvenidos.
Welcome. Welcome, Ségolène. We have some minutes for discussion. I think it's going to be very interesting because there's a lot of homework for public authorities to do. And so now we need to see how this green transition is going to be become a reality. Spain has just recently passed a law on climate change. The European Commission has launched 55 and the climate measures package. So what will be the implications of this pact for all the different economic stakeholders, and what changes need to be promoted to have sustainable transformation plans? Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to join this conversation and to share this sofa with someone who I admire. And when approaching an ecological transition, and all transitions that underlie it, because the energy transition is one of those, it's not, nothing is compartmentalized and not in isolation of the rest. There's one key element for success. There will be no ecological transition unless there is a cultural transition. We need to rethink a way of understanding life in all of its facets, as workers, as consumers, as a society as a whole. And it's true that in all the rulemaking procedure and plan and the plans that have been drawn to support this whole process of a green transition, we are all focusing on what companies must do, on what the public authorities must do in order to achieve those goals. It is true that the public government, that government bodies are an essential, a key player in this process, as is the private sector. But if the whole of society does not internalize the need to achieve that change will either be impossible or will entail costs that we will not be able to afford. So this change means that we need to have higher ambitions and to go faster than we initially thought, because among other reasons, science is telling us that we are lagging behind and we are going about things much more slowly than we should. So the overall message is shared by the vast majority of society, but if we start looking at the implementation on a local level, we all find problems. For instance, the yellow vest example in France, and what happens in other territories. For instance, in the mining areas, we know what that means in terms of social impact for transformation of coal mining. So all regulatory transformation that we need to implement needs to have a very wide social support. Otherwise, we will not be able to meet our goals. And for that, we need a cultural change. Cultural change is counterintuitive with regard to what we have known until now. Until now, we had been told that the social status of a person, of an individual, was directly related to their ability to purchase things. The higher the consumption, the top, the better the quality of their lives. And that's what we have been told. But now, in the educational system, we are now seeing the appearance of the emergence of a new way of looking at things. But we cannot wait for those for those children to become grown-ups to undertake this change. And it will be too late. We need to start doing that now. Yes, the role of government is important. Yes, the role of business is important, but also society as a whole, and everybody who can convey that message needs to do so. If we don't have that support, we will not succeed. Ms. Royal, the European Pact is sort of the roadmap for the member states and a great strategy in Europe. European leaders know that decarbonization is necessary, and that will lead to fundamental reforms. But from the geostrategic point of view, the EU has a key role in this Green Deal strategy. So what is the reaction that you are expecting from Russia, from China, from the US?
Well, I am very pleased to be here with you, Hugo Moran, and to meet again Beatriz Corredor. I am very, very happy to meet you again and to see a woman at the head of a big company in Spain. And we met a few years ago because you took part of the José Luis Zapatero government. And he was a great support during my presidential campaign and vice versa. So we have very interesting souvenir. Yes, you're right. In a few days, we have the COP26, and we hope a new dimension and a new will to act. And as Greta Thunberg said, we hope no blah, 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 blah. And as Queen Elizabeth said, we hope not only self-sufficient speeches, but real acts. And the truth is that we have the roadmap of what we have to do since 6 years, since the Paris Agreement. And as president of the COP21, I would like to share with you a souvenir, because it was not evident at all to get the Paris Agreement in December 2015. Because in November, we had in Paris a very terrible terrorist attack. And I was at this time the head of the French delegation as Minister of Environment and Energy, and in charge of the action agenda and ratification. And in November, we didn't know at all if the head of states and governments are coming or not in Paris. And thanks to Barack Obama, because he was the first head of state to say, yes, we are coming to Paris despite the risks. It's our duty, and it is the best response to terrorism, not only to come to Paris, but to have a success with the Paris Agreement. And at this time, it was a very special mood during the Paris Agreement, and everybody took the responsibility of making a success in Paris. Today, we don't have this kind of problem now, even if there is terrorism all around the planet. But la menace, the threat is the same. Our duty is the same, because we know that with rewarming, we have very, very big problems of security. And the Paris Agreement said we have to stay under 2 degrees Celsius of rewarming. And we are still moving today towards a plus 3 degrees Celsius global warming by the end of the century, and maybe even more. We saw that just a few seconds sooner. And the Paris Agreement requires us to take action, I repeat, to keep temperature increase below 2 degrees Celsius and, if possible, 1.5. Nowadays, the melting of the ice is about 430 billion tons each year. 430 million tons each year. And with the melting of ice, up to 800,000 tons of methane could be released. 800,000 tons of methane could be released. if greenhouse gas emissions continue to increase, we have about 70% of the permafrost that could be lost, 70% of the permafrost. Average sea level is projected to rise by 20 centimeters to 1 meter, from 20 centimeters to 1 meter by the end of the century. And this will increase, we know that, the frequency of extreme events, as we saw this summer all around the planet. And it will increase drought and desertification in the poorest countries, especially in Africa, causing massive migrations of poverty, causing wars, revolts, and insecurity. And more precisely, I would like to share with you the report entitled A New Climate for Peace for the G7 countries, identifying 7 fragility risks: competition for access to local resources, migration, food insecurity by volatile food prices and provision, transboundary water management, sea level rise and coastal degradation, impact on human health, and wars. That is why humanity must be at the rendezvous of history and taking in consideration, you're right, all the problem of geostrategy all around the world. But what is significant during COP21 is the spirit of this meeting, because you have countries around the table who are in war against the other head of state around the table. But everybody took his responsibility in working for a success. And that's why this spirit must be at the rendezvous during COP26, but in taking in consideration that we have the roadmap. We don't need new speeches. We don't need new ideas. We need only to put in force what we said in the Paris Agreement. And for that, we have 70 concrete, very concrete coalitions. You spoke about just during la table ronde précédente de ces actions. We have 70 concrete coalitions, building, forest, agriculture, and so on, renewable energy, and so on. And we need only that each country, every month, for example, give the results of their concrete actions. And we need to change la forme des COP. We need to change le déroulement des COP. And I told that to Antonio Guterres, as the former president of COP, we need absolutely to change la configuration des COP. Not only speeches by head of state, not only a diplomatic meeting, but something very concrete pour rendre compte, to give, pour rendre compte de ce qui a été fait mois après mois, année après année. Et c'est pour ça que la pression, the pressure of the ONG, Greenpeace, and so on, and people, and young people, is so necessary because they push to change the formal development of the COP. And this is very important. And I hope you will act for that.
Efectivamente, yo creo que hay un...
Yes, I think there's a commitment that is demanded and required by society as a whole for the COP to have a result that is actually translated into real terms in reality. Europe has committed to become absolutely neutral by 2050, completely zero carbon by then, so that it means that reducing the use of fossil fuels. In Spain, there's been already several months with high electricity prices. What can we do to minimize the collateral effects of this transition, of this green transition? Well, first of all, I believe that we should reflect. We should actually think Where do we come from? Were the prices that we had been paying until now, the real prices, were they actually covering the costs? Because we come from an electricity system, a power system that has externalized virtually every single cost. So we have been paying a fake price. It was an artificial price for our energy, for electricity. So we need to take decisions. The climate crisis itself is going to cost thousands of trillions to humankind. We are just, it's a delayed, a deferred payment of the energy that we had not paid before. As we are paying the arrears of what we had not paid. If we take that on board, if we assume that, we can actually discuss very calmly how we are going to be writing off those costs, how that we did not pay when we should have. It's true that in the meantime, many things have happened, generational changes have happened, and that must lead us to think and to reflect on the following facts. If we are now covering the costs of what past generations did not pay for, are we ready to pass on to the next generations the costs that we ourselves will not be covering? Well, only if we are ready to discuss this, to put this on the table, then we will be able to discuss all the different measures we will need to be adopting for a green transition. So we are paying for what we are using up now and for whatever we used before and never paid. Okay, so if this argument can be shared or not, but what is true is that consumers have to live with the increase in prices in their daily life. So we are running a risk now in this debate, this whole discussion. We say renewables, yes, but not this way. That's what's been said right now. We need to be aware of the fact that any delays, any moratorium that we apply, we delay the implementation of renewables, is equivalent to extending our dependency on fossil fuels. So are we ready to assume there's extra costs and delay the penetration of renewable energies? It is true, we need to reach an overall social agreement, a collective agreement to help us make progress in our response. If this leads to costs that are unaffordable for the vast majority of the population, then transition will be much harder. But this is why in Spain, the Deputy Prime Minister, she played a major role in this concept of a fair transition, that it has now been included in the climate change conferences. This is something key. You cannot have a green transition if it is not a fair transition. So you need support and measures for the most vulnerable parts of the population. The green transition is not going to be free of charge. We need to be aware of that. We need to be aware that we will need to shoulder those costs. And we need to remember that we are most likely facing that, as Ségolène was saying, will need to translate into the new agreements in the Glasgow conference, that the idea is not saving or succeeding in and make it a successful conference as a successful text. No, we need to have successful action. So it needs to go beyond that. And the whole of the international community needs to internalize the fact that this is not something that any country can solve on its own. There are tensions, social tensions, because of the high cost of energy. Yes, but this cannot, even that small problem cannot be solved by just one single country individually. We need to implement support mechanisms for those sectors that can be worse off with this transformation, but that cannot lead us in any way to reach the conclusion that maybe changing is not the solution. Changing is the only possible solution. Mrs. Royal.
We must be very careful about the carbon taxes, national carbon taxes, and we have the Gilets jaunes in France, and European carbon taxes. I think it's very dangerous because we can't build an ecological policy against people. We can't. And against economical activities. We can't. I called that, j'ai appelé ça the punitive ecology. I don't like the punitive ecology. And when you ask people to pay tax to be clean, they answer, we want to be clean, we want an electric car, but we don't have the money to buy an electric car. So we don't want to pay taxes only to be punished. It's not our fault. We want to be clean, but we can't. We have not the purchase power, or we have not the technological solutions. That's why I think there is two major questions. First of all, we have to realize that European countries don't have the same energetic models. We don't have the same energetic models. And so we don't have the same energetic interests. So the main question is, how can we build in Europe a common interest? This is the main question. We can't go at the same speed towards zero carbon emission. We can't. We know that. But I think we can have the same vision. That is why I deeply think that renewable energies are the energies of reconciliation, because they lead to energy independence. It's very simple, but we have to act towards that. And the first step is to save energy. And as you can notice, nobody is speaking about saving energy and efficiency and energetic efficiency, especially in building. This is the first step. And in France, when I was Minister of Environment, I created une déduction fiscale, des taxes, pour les travaux dans les...
For works in buildings.
Families, until 8,000 euros per 1% and 16,000 euros less income tax for a family. And then this was, ça a été supprimé. And so les travaux se sont arrêtés.
And then, so when this was taken out, then people stopped retrofitting the houses.
To encourage energetic efficiency. This is the first step. And the second question is how can we build a strong clean energy policy in Europe without social problems? You see, we must be very careful, I repeat, on the carbon price and carbon tax. And the question also is how can we help business to succeed the energy transition? we have to secure, there is two answers. First, we have to secure transition and to make good rules and not changing the rules. And as you can notice, when a new government is arriving at the head of a state in Europe, is changing the rules. I think the permanence of the rules, fiscal rules, social rules, is very, very important for business to invest, because if there is not, les règles stabilized regulation rules, so business can't invest. And I think that a big decision about Europe could be to stabilize the rules for all the business in Europe in energy. And the global green leader for climate emergency, we have to rethink, of course, the economic model. It's not a burden, we have to repeat that. It's not a burden, it's a chance to make this energetic transition. It's not a burden, it's a chance. We have to create, we have to imagine, we have to imagine new habits, we have to imagine new models of consumption, we have to imagine new jobs. So it is a hope for the youth. It is a chance, it is not a burden. This is very important to be repeated. And the most important for our future, because hope is life. And after the COVID, we need hope. And climate fight is a new hope. And we have to, on doit empoigner ce new hope. And not blah, 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 and the same thing. You understand? There is no more enthusiasm. We have to be enthusiastic again with that fight, because it's an opportunity, and it's a chance to have this opportunity, not only to be suffering of COVID and all those problems we have just go through away. But it's a hope, and I think that le ton, le mood, la façon de parler, the way of speaking, it's very important for the 1st of November.
Muchas gracias por ese...
English is not the next step. I will speak in French.
Por ese optimismo que yo creo que el optimismo.
I think that optimism is essential in these times, and now we need to wrap up. I will be asking you headlines to give us some headlines in the recovery, for the recovery. What will be those headlines in your view? Give us a headline. I will just copy something that, you know, I didn't know that this was going to happen, but I will just copy something I heard. It's not about rebuilding the past. It is about rebuilding a different future, to building a different future. What about you?
We'll never forget to coordinate the different level of action. You see, there is the planet, there is the states, there is the towns and territories, and there is people. And sometimes decisions are taken for the planet and for the town. No, we have for each decision and each action between these 70 coalitions, concrete coalitions. It's very simple. We have to, on doit être très rationnel comme ça, very rational. And for each action, okay, what is going on for the planet, what is going on for the nations, what is going on for the towns and territories, and what is going on for companies and peoples. And if we do that, if we are very online for each action and rendre des comptes sur qu'est-ce qui a été fait, what is going on next year at each COP and each month, and I imagine we can have a tableau de bord, and each action, and each countries must be obliged to say, okay, for building we did that, for agriculture we did nothing, for renewable energy, and then there is transparency towards people, towards public opinion, you see? And if there is democracy, if there is transparency, is there is truth, so people can understand what is going on, and everybody is able to act towards, on the line, towards the same direction. And so we can succeed to go to the 2 degrees of rewarming. But it's difficult, it's hard, but I think it's always possible. It's still possible.
Yo creo que sí, que claro que es posible.
I agree. I think it's possible, of course. Well, thank you all very much for being with us to wrap up this session. Thank you all of you who are attending here in person, those who are watching us online. Thank you to Red Eléctrica and to everybody who's made this possible, the chair, Fatima, Tony, all the audiovisual team. And just some short remarks. Green transition depends. It's very much in the hands of private businesses as well. And they have a lot of homework to do. Society needs to be behind it. It needs to be supportive, and it needs to be a fair transition with measurable, objective commitments, and that it can be easily benchmarked so everybody knows how things are going. Thank you very much.